Welcome to this live webcast on yesterday's election. I'm Dwayne Gang, a politics reporter here at the Press Enterprise. Yesterday was not a countywide election in either Riverside or San Bernardino counties, but we still had a host of important municipal and school board races on the ballot. We're going to go over the latest results and give you some analysis from Press Enterprise reporters and editors have been following these races closely. I'm joined here at the start by John Bender, one of our Metro editors who oversaw election coverage last night and from last night on the web and what you see in today's paper. John, thanks for being here. But first, we're going to go over some of the latest election results. We're going to get right into those in case you didn't want to stay up late last night. We've got the latest results here. These are the latest final unofficial election results. What happens now is the registrar has to count any provisional ballots or any mail-in ballots that were dropped off at polling places yesterday. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to start with the Alvord Unified School District. There's for 2 seats. It looks like Carolyn Wilson with 34.6% of the vote will win, and Ben Johnson with 27.38%. I believe both of them are incumbents.
That's right.
We're going to now go to Banning. Again, this was 3 seats were up, and we have the top vote getter here. Was Larry Ellis, followed by Ray Coach Curtis with 22.25%, followed by Deborah Dukes with 15.8%. All 3 of them appear headed to win seats on the Banning Unified School District Board.
Wait, I think it's Curtis, Casadas, and Larry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Deborah Dukes
right.
is interesting because when she first ran a few years back, she went to bed thinking she had lost, woke up and had actually won. This time, early on, it looked like she was leading, but then as the final results came in, it looked like Alex Casadas had taken that seat.
Right, yeah, that was my mistake there. I misread my sheet here on the election results. Thanks for correcting me, John. So we're going to next move to the Riverside Unified School District. Again, this was 3 seats up. 2 incumbents, I believe Gail Cloud and Tom Hunt were the incumbents, and they've won new terms. But Patricia Locke Dawson, she was a challenger, and she was able to pull off a win with about 17% of the vote to get on a seat with RUSD. Next, we're going to head into Menifee. This was, again, a spot for 2 seats on the Menifee Union School District Board. This one's kind of interesting. We're going to have more with Michelle Clampy later in the show about this particular race. But Robert O'Donnell won a seat with 29.3% of the vote. He was an incumbent. Scott Mann, he's a former council member with Menifee, now is going for the school board and won a seat there. But we're going to have more on that race later in the show. We're going to move next to, I believe, Paris. And here's the Paris School District results, again, elected for 2. So it's, I'm not sure how her name is pronounced, but Vernicia Green Jordan and Tom Elliott won seats on the board there in Paris.
Not very high turnout there.
Next, Romoland. Again, this is Sandra Ann Toussaint winning and David Sperry winning for 2 seats there on the Romoland School District Board. Let's see, what are we going to go to next here? I believe we're going to go to City of Norco City Council race. This was a spot for 3, and it was two incumbents won re-election on here, Berwin Hanna and Kathy Azevedo. But then a challenger won a seat or appeared winning to seat Herb Higgins. Of course, he's a former mayor and council member in Norco from a few years ago, and was then off the board for a while. So
right, he had
looks
served
like
2 terms beginning in 1999.
Right, so it looks like he ran again, and he had I think he had some of the backing and some financial support from the Riverside Sheriff's Union as well in that race.
And the primary issue there was that the folks that got elected support keeping that equestrian theme in the town, keeping that flavor.
Right. That's some of what has put Norco on the map, so to speak. Right.
They've got a Bob's Big Boy where the Bob has a cowboy hat, and they've got horse trails throughout town. They've been featured on a national trail riding TV show.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now we're going to move into the city of Riverside. This was the Ward 7 race. This was a runoff from the June election. No candidate was able to get that 50+1 in the June election to avoid the runoff. But incumbent Steve Adams, this race, we're going to have more on this later in the show with City Hall reporter Alicia Robinson. But this race at times got pretty heated between Steve Adams and Bandriff, but the incumbent was able to pull off another term in re-election.
Right. It wasn't all that close at the end, which was a surprise to many. Mm-hmm. I know there was some mudslinging. Adams said now that he's going to continue his efforts, that it shows that people supported the Renaissance and that the direction of City Hall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're going to go, let's see, this was a water district race out in the Cabazon area. Francis Magnus and Carrie Mariner won us 2 seats there to the governing board of the Cabazon Water District. We're going to go into next, I believe, this is the City of Riverside Measure I. This is the parcel tax. It renews a $19 per year parcel tax to support library programs. And again, we're going to have more on this later in the show with City Hall reporter.
That was one of the most interesting results because it needed a 2/3 majority to pass, and I think it got well over 85%. It's going to fund library staffing, library programs, and it shows that the voters, at least those that turned out yesterday, really back their libraries and don't want to see any more loss of city funding.
Right. And these are one of the things that now has to now go to voters, these types of taxes. The city council couldn't have just done this arbitrarily, could they?
No, it required a 2/3 majority to pass, which is a high threshold, and many tax measures in the past few years have not even come close. Mm-hmm. So that was a surprise.
Right. Okay, I think we're going to move into San Bernardino. We've got San Bernardino City Unified School District. This was 4 seats up here. So as you can see, we have Margaret Hill, Mike Gallo, Linda Savage, and I think in Sharon Perong won seats there to San Bernardino City Unified School District, which is, of course, is one of the largest school districts in our coverage area, and actually one of the largest in the state, I believe.
This could show that the voters were tired of the impasse between the district and its employee groups, in which they couldn't even hire hundreds of non-teaching employees. Mm-hmm. So this could show a new direction for that district.
Right. We had some other interesting races in City of San Bernardino. Of course, one of the ones that was very closely watched was the city attorney race in the City of San Bernardino. Longtime city attorney Jim Penman faced a challenge from David McKenna, who, of course, I think was a former public defender, former county supervisor in San Bernardino. And in that race, it was closely watched as an interesting political dynamic in the City of San Bernardino, where the city attorney is kind of at odds with the mayor. But Jim Penman was able to win another term. I think he's been, for as long as many people can remember, Jim Penman has been the city attorney there in San Bernardino.
Yeah, and what made this even more interesting, not just the depth of bitterness between the two candidates, the Penman camp, and some saw McKenna as being supported and directed by Mayor Pat Morris. But the Penman camp also won in the council races, as you'll see.
Right.
So his supporters will now have a majority in the council.
And that is something you don't really see too often in local races, where you have people kind of running together as a ticket. I mean, and we're going to have more on this with San Bernardino City Hall reporter Brian Rocos later in the show. But he actually had signs with city clerk candidates where they would have signs together. You don't really see that too often in local races, do you?
That's pretty unusual.
Right. And you can see one of them there. Okay, so that's the city attorney race in San Bernardino. We're going to move on to the City of San Bernardino city clerk race. This is the longtime city clerk was not seeking re-election, I believe. And you can see that Amelia Sanchez Lopez, who was one of the candidates that was running kind of on that ticket with city attorney Jim Penman, won with 28% of the vote there in the city clerk's race. We're going to move on. I think we're going to go. This was might be a surprise to a lot of people, but Tobin Brinker was the incumbent city council member for Ward 3 in San Bernardino, and he lost to John Valdivia. So this is, and you can see it wasn't the turnout was only, the winner only got 781 votes. Of according to these latest final but still unofficial results. But that's 69%.
And again, Valdivia was supported by Penman.
Okay, we're going to move on. This is Ward 5. Chaz Kelly won re-election, looks like pretty easily. He is the incumbent council member. And again, even with provisional ballots and some dropped off at polling places, that's a margin that the challenger's probably not going to overcome there. Let's see, we're going to move on. This is Ward 7 in City of San Bernardino City Council. Wendy McCamick is the incumbent there, and again, a political ally, and was on that same ticket with City Attorney Jim Penman, and she also won re-election against John Mulvihill.
So it's going to be interesting to see the direction the city takes with the switch on the council majority.
Right, and we're going to have more later on, particularly on San Bernardino with Brian Rokas, but also Press Enterprise columnist Cassie McDuff will be on later to talk about the San Bernardino races. So those are kind of the latest results. We do have some outside of the Press Enterprise's main coverage area, but there are some interesting races. I believe there was a race out in Blythe that was really, if I can find my results here, separated by only a very, very small percentage of votes. And what was interesting about some of the issues with Blythe is the registrar actually this year used a helicopter to ferry in ballots from Blythe. Blythe is pretty far away. It takes several hours to get to Blythe from Riverside, where the registrar of voters' office is located. And they actually flew in votes via a sheriff's helicopter to help out there to get those results in sooner, because how timely election results are posted has been an issue for the Riverside registrars in past elections. So I think they wanted to kind of avoid some of that. But the Blythe race, I mean, in final unofficial, two candidates had 266 votes each. So the top vote getter, it's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens out there with some of those votes. It's pretty close. Okay, we're now joined by Riverside City Hall reporter Alicia Robinson. Thanks for being here. We're going to talk about two things to start off with: the Ward 7 runoff race between incumbent Councilman Steve Adams and challenger John Brandriff, and then we're going to talk about the library parcel tax that won pretty easily, it looked like, last night.
Yes.
But let's start with the runoff. How did we get into this position in the first place? How did they finish in the June election to start off with?
Well, back in June, there were actually 3 candidates for the Ward 7 seat. It was Adams, who is in he's finishing up a second term now, and then John Brandriff, who's sort of a political newcomer. He hasn't run for office before. He's a member of the city's Community Police Review Commission. And then Terry Frizzell, who's a former mayor and councilwoman. And in that 3-way race, somebody had to take 50% plus 1 vote to win outright. Nobody did that. So the top 2, which were Adams and Brandriff, went to the runoff that we had yesterday.
Right, and Adams was the top vote getter in the June primary
right.
as well. Right. What were some of the key issues that kind of dominated the race from June through yesterday? I know there was some issues with where each of the candidates stood on the state's realignment plan, where each of the candidates stood on a separate issue with some school district possible merger. I mean, what were the key issues between those two candidates in the election?
Well, I think actually things seemed pretty tame throughout most of the campaign up until the very end. Brandriff sort of billed himself as kind of the outsider. He was going to return transparency to City Hall that he said was lacking. And Adams was more sort of running on his record saying, well, look at all the great things we've done in the city. We've built all these new public facilities and made all these improvements. Towards the end of the election, though, they kind of got into some skirmishes about one of the issues was there has been a proposal floated to merge the Riverside Unified and Alvord school districts, and it seems like some of the Alvord supporters are very opposed to that. They want to stay independent, and Adams picked up on the fact that Brandriff at one point had expressed a sort of, I don't know if I'd call it ambivalence, but he said, well, if that's what they think is best for them, it's fine with me. And so Adams kind of ran with that as saying, well, he wants to take your local control away from you
Right.
and your school district.
Right.
So I think some of the people with the school district were a little concerned over what the different stances were on that issue.
Well, what were the reactions last night from the candidates themselves? And what was the reaction to from Councilman Adams on his reelection?
Well, when I talked to him, it was still early. We were still waiting for more results, but he seemed pretty optimistic, and he basically said, if the results hold, which they did, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, the whole time that I've been in office, which is, working on quality of life issues, making sure we have good schools and that the community's safe. And I unfortunately wasn't able to reach Brandriff last night, so I don't know what his reaction was.
We'll see what he has to say today. Ward 7, what communities are part of Ward 7? What part of the city is Ward 7?
It's basically the westernmost portion of the city. It's sort of the La Sierra area.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, let's move on to the library tax issue. This was a $19 per parcel library fee. How did we get into this situation where the city wanted to go ahead and put this to a vote of the people?
Well, this was actually a renewal of a tax that was originally, it's been in place since 2002, and if it had not been passed last night, it would have expired next year. And I believe back when it was originally passed, it was a way to sort of supplement some of the library's programs and services. But over time, with all the budget cuts that the city has had, the library has suffered a lot from those in terms of its operating budget. And so this tax, it raises about $1.3 million a year for library program services. It even pays for some staffing. And it's become a somewhat larger portion of the library's operating budget. So this time around, I think the supporters wanted to make sure people were aware that if this tax was not renewed, there probably were going to have to be cuts.
Mm-hmm. What were some of there was a lot of civic backers and community leaders who supported the measure. What was the campaign like? Was there any kind of real organized opposition to the tax?
No, there really wasn't. I think that there were some people out in the community who were critical of it, and I think that some of them felt that to continue the tax was sort of a tacit approval of the way that the city has treated the library's budget. And so, they felt like why should they have to keep paying out of their pocket for something that in the past had always been a part of the general fund, which is also their tax dollars.
Right.
But there was not an organized campaign against it.
Right. And just to remind people, that tax required a 2/3 supermajority, basically a 2/3 majority to get approval. And let's see, that's just as a reminder, we're going to put the results back up here. The yes, and these are according to the final but still unofficial results. There's still some ballots that will have to be counted, anything that was dropped off at polls yesterday or any provisional ballots cast. But as you can see, the Measure I campaign, 16,092 votes in favor, yes, to just 2,787 votes no. So that's 85%. So they easily got that 2/3 majority for that to gain approval. Remind us how much this is planned to generate, and does the city, does libraries, do they know what it's going to go for? Is it going to go for just plain operations, or could they fund some capital improvements and other things like that with the money?
It is actually, I believe it's actually spelled out in the language of the tax that it is specifically, it's for programs and operations. It's not really for capital projects. And again, it's about $1.3 million a year, and it's the things that they have said that it's funded so far, which is probably what's going to continue, is about, I think it's about 15 staff positions, as well as programs like children's story time, tutoring, and a program where they deliver books to homebound seniors, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alicia, we appreciate you joining us. Now, there was just two things on for the Riverside ballot this November. That was the Ward 7 runoff, as well as the library tax. But next year could be an interesting one to follow. We have the mayor's races up in the city of Riverside. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And longtime Mayor Ron Loveridge is not seeking another term, so we're going to have an open seat. Do you expect that now that this kind of November is away, do you expect the campaign to start really heating up first part of the year for the mayoral race in Riverside?
Well, this election has already been going on for many months now. We've got currently 3 sitting council members, Mike Gardner in Ward 1, Andy Melendrez in Ward 2, and Rusty Bailey in Ward 3 have all thrown their hats in. We've also got a former councilman, Ed Adkisson, is also running. And the people that I've been talking to have basically said, you know what, people don't like to campaign, let alone start a campaign over the holidays.
Right,
but
sure.
come January, things are probably going to pick up. It wouldn't surprise me to see a few more people jump into that race.
Right. Well, that will be an interesting one to watch, and we'll, of course, have to have you back on as the campaign unfolds to get the latest on that, of course. But that is for the 2012 elections in the city of Riverside. So, again, Lisa Robinson, City Hall reporter for the Press Enterprise here in Riverside. Appreciate you joining us to chat a little bit about the library tax in the measure in the Ward 7 runoff race. Again, in those races, the library tax passed, and incumbent Steve Adams won re-election to another term on the city council against challenger John Brandreth. We're going to take a break, and then we'll be back and we'll discuss some school board elections in Southwest Riverside County with school reporter and education reporter Michelle Clampy. So stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Appreciate it.
Chevrolet Cadillac, the #1 volume dealership in Riverside and San Diego counties. It's the Chevrolet season of doing. Get behind the wheel of a select new 2011 Chevy model and take advantage of 0% APR financing plus $1,000 in bonus cash. Go for the rugged 2011 Avalanche or Colorado, the rough and tumble Silverado, or even a Suburban, Tahoe, or Traverse model. Hurry into Paradise Chevrolet Cadillac today. We're conveniently located at 27360 Inez Road between Winchester and Rancho California Road in Temecula.
Nice. No. Oops. Yeah, sure. Let's go.
Moms everywhere are finding ways to keep kids active and healthy.
Works every time.
Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov.
Right now, you can lease a new 2012 Honda Accord LX sedan for $129 a month. That's just $129 a month for a 2012 Accord LX at Diamond Valley Honda. Or save with zero due-at-lease signing on select new Honda models at Diamond Valley Honda. Visit Diamond Valley Honda in the Hemet Auto Mall or on the web at diamondvalleyhonda.com.
Diamond Valley Honda, drive home happy.
We cover the issues you care about. Here at the Press Enterprise and PE.com, local news matters whether you live along Route 66 or on Main Street. We provide regional analysis and in-depth investigation of issues like education, transportation, the environment, and much more. Important matters are covered here. That is how we keep you connected to your community. The Press Enterprise and PE.com. For home delivery, call 1-800-794-NEWS.
How long have you been using that style, John?
Since 2000.
It looks like it's been like 1940. I mean, how did you come up with that? It's two-sided, right?
It is.
And it's just so
Worked well for
team
me.
1 is on one side, and you can flip it over and do
Just flip it over.
team 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can use it on the sideline, in the press box, wherever you want.
And do you feel comfortable with this? Do you ever make any mistakes or?
Oh yeah, mistakes are made occasionally, but
Right.
yeah, I feel very comfortable.
So usually though, you like to be this is for sideline duty.
It can go either way. I prefer the press box because I can blog from up there.
So this particular thing, this is gonna be in the press box. Would you have this in the press box too?
I would have it in the press box.
Wow.
And that way, if any of my colleagues or foes get out of hand, I can just kind of whap them too.
Even better. Even better. Well, that's some more wise and sage advice from the prep dog here at HS Game Time.
On rare occasions, opposites can coexist. Introducing the Sport Hybrid. The combination only Honda could engineer. The all-new CRZ Sport Hybrid.
All right, welcome back to this live webcast on yesterday's municipal and school board elections in Riverside and San Bernardino counties. We wanted to touch base on a couple more things related to the library parcel election, Measure I, in City of Riverside with Alicia Robinson, our City Hall reporter. So she's still here with us. So this was the $19 renewal of that parcel tax. But you had some things you wanted to add about voter participation and voter turnout. The election results. I mean, the tax or the renewal passed 85% of the vote overwhelmingly was approved. Easily got that two-thirds that it needed. But what about overall voter participation? What numbers do you have? What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, yeah, there was just one point that I wanted to make. I was looking at the statistics this morning, and basically, while you would think, 85% passage, that's a huge margin of approval. That means everyone is fully in support of this tax. But you have to put it in context of how many people actually participated in the election. And citywide, in the city of Riverside, there are about roughly 114,000 registered voters, and there were about under 19,000 people that voted, that cast ballots on Measure I, or that voted for Measure I. So that's basically, it gives you about 16.5% of the total turnout that was supporting that.
And that was a citywide election. So that was the only city issue that was on a citywide ballot. Of course, there were other school board races and everything like that in the city, but that was citywide as opposed to just that local Ward 7 race.
Right. But with the library tax, another thing I think that you could argue worked in its favor was the fact that both of the school districts that serve the city of Riverside had school board elections on the ballot, and I suspect the people who tend to turn out for school board elections also are more likely to be library supporters, so that probably gave it a little bit of a boost.
Sure.
And I was going to also add just that in Ward 7, their participation was about 17 or so % in terms of the total registered voters in that ward. So, it could be seen as that the sitting councilman had a lot of support, or that people just weren't that interested enough in the election to bother to turn out.
Right. Anything else you want to add?
No.
All right, sounds good. Alicia Robinson, our Riverside City Hall reporter, thanks for joining us today. We are going to now move into our election coverage, and we're going to be joined here momentarily by Michelle Clampy, one of our education reporters out of our Temecula office. She is joining us by the telephone. Michelle, how are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty well for a late night.
Excellent. Good. Well, you had a number of three kind of school board races in Southwest County, Menifee Union, as well as Paris and the Romaland School District boards up for election yesterday. Let's start with Menifee. That one appeared pretty interesting. I believe it was for 2 seats on the board, 1 incumbent and 1 re-election, and that's Bob O'Donnell. Tell us how the results were. What were some of the big issues? What kind of surprised you? I know a lot of people might be interested in kind of wondering about Scott Mann. I believe he's a former council member for the city. Usually, oftentimes in the traditional realm of politics, people will start off on school board, then move from there up to city council, then maybe to the county board of supervisors, and then on up. Here he's going back, going for the school board. What's kind of the takeaway from the Menifee Union School District election yesterday?
Well, it's interesting because there were 2 seats up for election, and one of the incumbents, Bob O'Donnell, won his seat pretty handily, and then the second winner was Scott Mann, who beat Rita Peters, the other incumbent, for that second seat on the board. And it does seem a little unusual for someone who was once a city councilman to go back and join a school board, except for the fact that Scott used to work for the school district and was actually a casualty of layoffs in the school district a couple of years ago. So he's very familiar with the Menifee School District, and he knows a lot of the players there, and a lot of people know him. He worked as the district's risk manager, so he was involved in a lot of employee relations and things like that while he was serving there. But Scott, I had a chance to talk to him on the phone last night, and he said he thought one of the things that worked really well in his favor is that he spent a lot of time walking neighborhoods in the school district boundaries and made a lot of phone calls to friends. He lost his bid for a re-election to the city council a while back, but he has stayed active in that community and has definitely, I think that showed here in the election. He I think had 5 points over Rita, the next runner-up in that race.
Right.
So,
do you I would suspect that because he's a former council member, he had some built-in name recognition that probably helped him as well.
Absolutely. and he's been, like I said, he's been around, and it wasn't that long ago that he was running for city council for re-election. So he's well known in the community. He has a lot of existing name recognition, and then it sounds like he put some footwork into it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the issues that he raised in the campaign, and I think one that probably resonated with some voters given the climate today in politics, is this election was actually scheduled to be held a year ago, last year, and the school board a couple of years ago decided that just because the school budget situation was so challenging and there were so many unknowns, that they thought that they would be better off to postpone the election and the cost of the election for a year while they figured out where they were financially. And Scott was one of the people who raised in this campaign that really he didn't think the board should have done that the voters should have had a chance a year ago to decide who they wanted to represent them on the board. And Rita Peters was one of the ones who was in favor of postponing the election for a year. So I know that Scott kind of hammered that hard when he was talking to folks about the community.
And when school districts or city councils or water districts do that change, it basically extends the term for another year for the incumbents, which it can oftentimes be controversial. So the incumbents got another year off their existing term because of that delay.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So.
Right. Okay, we're going to move on and talk briefly here about the Romoland School District. Give us a rundown, how many candidates were up there, how many seats were up for election on the board, and were there any key issues that kind of dominated that race?
Sure. The Romoland race, Romoland is a small K-8 school district that's kind of between Paris and Menifee and overlaps a little bit both of those communities. But this was an interesting race because there were none of the incumbents ran for re-election.
Okay.
So there were 2 open seats and there were 4 candidates running, and all newcomers to the political spectrum. And the winners in this race were Sandra Toussaint, who is a parent and volunteer and who also works occasionally as a substitute in the classrooms as a substitute teacher's aide or classified aide. And the other winner was David Sperry, who's a real estate agent in the community. And everybody in this race pretty much said the same types of things. All of them said, they really have time now to give back. They're in a position to work in the community, and they're interested in making sure that, the kids have what they need in that community. Pretty much everybody was focused on, raising academic achievement and ensuring that the students, teachers, and administrators have the resources they need. It wasn't a particularly controversial race, but one of the things that's interesting about it is with these 2 new board members, this is a wholesale turnover of the school board in Menifee. Another board member in Romoland, another board member resigned over the summer, so they have 1 new board member who was appointed in September, and now they have these 2 new board members. So come December, when everybody's sworn in, they'll have 3 new board members and 2 existing board members.
Right.
And that comes at a time when Romoland has had a lot of changes in that school district. They have a new superintendent who's been there just a year. They have a bunch of new administrators, including a new school principal and a new assistant superintendent. So I think that folks in Romoland seem ready to, embrace some changes and move forward in that district and really see where they can go. Their test scores have been improving. They're getting ready to build a new middle school. So there's a lot of things going on in that district.
Right. With all new members on Romoland and a new member on the Menifee Union, did any possible, and this was kind of on the surface in some races up in Riverside as well, but was there any discussion about merging of some of these school districts, like the high schools in Paris and in Menifee? Did that come up during the campaign?
It did. Unification is a hot topic in that area because all of these small school districts that had elections last night all feed into the Paris Union High School District. And there has been a lot of talk for several years, particularly about the Menifee School District taking on the high school, Paloma Valley in that area and becoming a unified school district. The issue in all of these situations, and Romoland may do that sometime in the future, they have not talked about it as much as they have in Menifee. But the issue there is that there are a lot of requirements for school districts to meet before it's both financially viable and educationally viable to to do such a merger, and the conditions have just not been right, and they've persistently not been right for several years. So the big issue right now for unification is that it's not financially feasible. School districts are really strapped for funds, and there are a lot of financial considerations in terms of how they divide debt for bonds that have been passed by voters in each district, how they square that out so that voters aren't paying for things in another district once the split is the merge is made. So everybody I talked to about unification said they're supportive of the idea. People like the idea of having all their elementary, middle, and high schools all in their community under one leadership, one administration, but they don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize the financial picture for their schools. So they're gonna play that one pretty conservatively until the conditions change.
Right. So, but you do suspect that it will still be an ongoing issue into next year and beyond.
Absolutely. Right. I think probably for at least 5 years down the road. Right. That's my best guess anyway.
Well, Michelle, thanks for joining us. And, of course, Michelle, she covers education issues in Southwest Riverside County for us, and you can check out her stories on PE.com and in the Press Enterprise, and look for her follows on the Menifee and Paris and Romoland School District elections in the Press Enterprise on PE.com. Michelle, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
We're going to now move on, and we're going to talk about San Bernardino. There were some pretty interesting races in San Bernardino yesterday, including the city attorney's race. A longtime incumbent, Jim Penman, faced a challenge from David McKenna, but he was able to win another 4-year term as city attorney. And of course, for a lot of people, he's maybe the only city attorney they remember in the city of San Bernardino. He's a veteran of politics there. We're now joined by San Bernardino City Hall reporter Brian Rokos, who's going to discuss and talk with us about that race, as well as Press Enterprise columnist Cassie McDuff, who writes a lot about San Bernardino. Thanks for both of you for joining us today. Let's start with the city attorney's race. That one was pretty high profile. Give us a rundown of the candidates, Brian, how long Penman has been on the board, and the type of issues and the type of challenge he faced from David McKenna.
Jim Penman has been city attorney for 24 years, 6 terms, so he just won a 7th term. Lifelong San Bernardino resident, San Bernardino High School graduate. He enjoys a wide base of support, businesses, former attorneys, former judges, and the people on the average voters. David McKenna, the challenger, is a former San Bernardino County supervisor, former San Bernardino County public defender. He had been living in Riverside County until unknown persons recruited him to be a candidate against Penman.
Right. What were some of the key issues that dominated that race? Why he was obviously unsuccessful in convincing voters that he should succeed Jim Penman as city attorney, but what was he campaigning on? Why was he saying that he would be better off than Penman? Obviously, the voters disagreed.
Well, Penman has a reputation, and he obviously has a different version of it. The Mayor Pat Morris, over the weekend on his Facebook page, accused Penman of bullying and intimidating city employees. Former Police Chief Keith Kelmer cited trouble from Penman as a reason for retiring. Public Works Director Nadeem Majaj recently wrote a memo to Penman accusing him of bullying and trying to intimidate him. And this, we keep hearing stories about this, and it didn't resonate obviously enough with voters for McKenna to win, even though he had endorsements from all the newspapers.
Right. We keep hearing that, but it seems that Penman remains pretty popular, and maybe and Cassie, we can get into this with you a little bit later, but it appears and I don't know if this came up in the campaign, but it appears that maybe voters want that kind of check and balance in the city of San Bernardino, because obviously the city attorney Jim Penman is not on the same page politically as Mayor Pat Morris.
Well, during the campaign, Jim Penman told voters that he is investigating unspecified people at City Hall. He used the FBI investigation at the San Bernardino airport, telling voters that you need me to, watch over the city, prevent corruption. Jim Penman referred to himself as a public watchdog, and David McKenna as the political lapdog of Mayor Pat Morris.
Right. And just as a reminder here on the vote totals there, these are, of course, the final election night semi-official results for the city attorney's race. And, of course, there are provisional ballots and any kind of vote-by-mail ballots that were dropped off on election day still to be counted. Generally speaking, though, those generally, unless there's an overwhelming number of them, do not change the outcome of elections. But 6,130 votes, or 51.9%, so just shy of 52% for City Attorney Jim Penman, and 5,677 votes for David McKenna. Cassie, let me turn to you. What struck you about this race between McKenna and Penman?
Well, I would say for a 7-term incumbent, that is a pretty close race. You would expect somebody who's been in office that long to win very comfortably, and in fact, it was one of the closest races in the San Bernardino city races.
Mm-hmm. So it was close, but he was able to pull it off. Do you have any? What's your take on some of the reasons why you think Jim Penman was able to, even though it was closer than what maybe he has had in past elections, why he was able to pull it off?
Well, as Brian said, he does have that constituency of people who view him as the corruption watchdog in the city. He's always able to cast himself that way right before the election and imply that there are pending investigations of alleged corruption. Right. He hasn't made any specifics known. I don't know really what they are. But I really don't think McKenna ran as strong a campaign as he could have. I think that one thing that could have hurt him was that he was newly back in San Bernardino after 5 years away, and that he hadn't voted in Riverside County during the 5 years that he lived.
Yeah, I mean, do you expect that could have hurt him? Because, I mean, San Bernardino is a city that faces a number of challenges. Do you think voters might have seen it, hey, we want one of our own, so to speak, as city attorney. Maybe did not view him as one of their own because he had lived outside of the city for a few years?
Well, it may have hurt him just enough to keep his votes down so that he couldn't topple Penman. But as I said, a 4-point difference between a challenger and now a 7-term incumbent, that's pretty close.
Right. Brian, you wanted to jump in.
Well, one of the things in talking with David McKenna's own campaign staff is they acknowledge that he's not a politician. He's a former judge, public defender, and he's a semi-retired civil litigation attorney. And someone made the comment that he was late to arrive and early to leave events. He said, no, that's not the case. But they said he's not a politician. And Jim Penman's a politician. Jim, in the campaign, consistently hit anti-McKenna points very hard.
Well, and after 6-7 terms, he's a seasoned campaigner as well. You were at both of the election kind of campaign headquarters last night. What was the mood like at both of them?
Well, it was interesting in that David McKenna actually arrived a little bit after the first initial results were announced. It was very quiet, a couple of dozen people. I think people were hopeful at the McKenna campaign. I went to the Penman event. Actually, it was Wendy McCamick, Councilwoman McCamick, hosting Jim Penman, as well as some of the other council candidates, and it was very, very festive, very confident people, very celebratory, and the place was the restaurant was overflowing with people, and just if you counted noses, you could see the breadth and depth of the support for Penman. Right. And David McKenna told me that he was surprised during the campaign that the that there was that much person on the street support.
One of the things that we touched on at the very beginning of the show with John Bender, who was the editor, of course, overseeing our election coverage, is you don't see this too often on the local level, but there was clearly Jim Penman was running on a ticket with a number of other candidates who also did very well yesterday. You know, he had campaign signs made. They had campaign signs together with one of the city clerks. You know, Cassie, did that surprise you how there was kind of this ticket running together so closely? I mean, you know, it's one thing to hold similar views politically and where you want the council to go. But to have those campaign signs together, to have them running together as a ticket.
Absolutely. I've never seen it before in a municipal election. I've never seen a city attorney candidate align himself with a city clerk candidate, and in fact, the rest of the slate. I think the factor that that joined them all together, in addition to simply Penman's leadership, was also the backing of the labor unions, the public safety unions, the police and fire unions, who got out there and put signs up, lawn signs in neighborhoods, walked precincts for all of the candidates, and there were 5 of them at the party that Brian mentioned last night. I think when he was at the McKenna one, I was at the Penman one, and vice versa.
Right.
But it was interesting to see how many city employees there were, particularly city attorney employees there were at that event.
Right. And I want to get into the city clerk's race here in a minute, but one of the ones that may surprise a lot of people if they're waking up this morning and looking at the election results was an incumbent San Bernardino City Council member, Tobin Brinker, went down in defeat, or is headed that way. I mean, by not a small margin either, 69% to 30%. Brian, how did that? What were some of the dynamics in that race?
Well, it could be something as simple as a broken streetlight. John Valdivia campaigned, as did all the candidates, talking about basic things like potholes and streetlights. And Valdivia had a slogan: "Your pothole is my pothole. Your broken streetlight is my broken streetlight." And he said that Tobin Brinker had ignored those issues. I'm sure Mr. Brinker would disagree with that. John Valdivia had more than 90% of his campaign funded by the police and fire unions, and I think he received upwards of around $60,000, which is far more than Mr. Brinker spent.
Now, was he on this so-called ticket with the city attorney?
Yes. In fact, Jim Penman, during a council meeting this year, said in open session, "I encourage everyone to vote for John Valdivia, Chaz Kelly in Ward 5, and Wendy McCamick in Ward 7, and Amelia Sanchez Lopez for city clerk."
And we should note that Chaz Kelly, an incumbent, appears headed for a re-election, as well as Wendy McCamick in those 2 races. Other members, Ricky Van Johnson in Ward 6 in San Bernardino was running unopposed in that race. Cassie, were you surprised that by the results in that Tobin Brinker race?
Absolutely. I think Brinker has a pretty good depth of support among his constituents. I mean, one example is when the Orange Show rave was keeping people awake, he was getting text messages from all over his ward, and he was answering each of them. So people have his cell phone number in his ward. I think what really did him in was that he has been pushing and pushing for pension reform, which would require particularly the public safety unions, which, by the way, the fire union is now at an impasse with the city, to fund a share of their pensions. That issue is what brought the union support out in favor of Valdivia, and Brinker said they just hammered him with negative mailers. It was a very negative campaign.
The city clerk's race, this was the incumbent was not running for re-election, and this was a pretty crowded race, and I guess this will go to a runoff?
That's right.
February 7th.
Made that mistake earlier in the show, but they will go to a runoff in February. Brian, give us a rundown of when the runoff is and who's going to be in that runoff.
It'll be Amelia Sanchez Lopez. She was supported financially by Jim Pinman. They've known each other for 35 years. She's been on various city boards and commissions. She'll be opposed by Gigi Hanna, a former newspaper reporter and has worked in public relations. And that'll be February 7th. Rachel Clark, the retiring city clerk, said she's going to urge the city council to have a mail-in election rather than a more expensive election where you would go to the polls.
Right, and we apologize for the graphic there. We'll try to get that corrected as soon as we can, but it is Sanchez Lopez versus Hanna in a February 7th runoff race. Cassie, you had some thoughts on this race. I mean, generally, city clerks' races are, hardly anyone pays attention to them, but I don't think that was the case this time around in San Bernardino.
Well, that's right. This time, the city attorney, as Brian mentioned, endorsed very heavily one of the candidates and, in fact, shared his campaign signs with her. So they ran as a duo to citywide offices. What was interesting was that no one from within the city clerk's office ran. Usually there is someone who is ready to fill the shoes of a retiring or departing clerk. No one ran. Some people have said that's because no one wants to deal with all the turmoil that's stirred up by the city attorney, and other people have said that's because some of the leaders in that office don't live in the city. They live elsewhere. You have to live in the city to be able to run.
And did the incumbent weigh in? Did she endorse anybody, or just kind of decided to stay out of that race?
She stayed out of it. She felt that it was important to stay neutral, and she was not at any of the parties. I went to three of them, three of the top vote getters, and she was not at any of them. It was interesting to see which city members of the city staff were at the different events.
Brian, were there some issues that dominated that city clerk's race? You went to a number of the forums.
I can't say that there were. I mean, people were saying, I will keep accurate records. I have training. I have experience. Peggy Hazlitt is an assistant in the mayor's office. She ran for city clerk. Obviously, she's not part of the runoff. Amelia Sanchez Lopez, during one of the forums, talked about avoiding corruption, and I think that was largely seen as a scripted comment provided by Jim Penman.
There were some accusations toward her that she was just saying and doing things that Jim Penman wanted her to say. How did she respond to some of those accusations?
Well, there was a famous incident at a Democratic club forum where Mrs. Sanchez Lopez and was Esther Gigi Hanna was there, and Esther Jimenez were there. Not all the candidates were there, but depending on who you talk to, I believe it was Gigi Hanna asked from the audience a question of Sanchez Lopez, and if you talk to some people, they said that she couldn't answer the question and that Jim Penman stood up and answered it for her. Penman and Sanchez Lopez said no, she answered the question just fine, and that got a lot of buzz in the. I don't want to say it got a lot of buzz in the community, but certainly people on the inside. And talking about the community, I think it's important to note there was about a 15% voter turnout.
And interesting, created some buzz, and of course us political reporters found it interesting. Cassie, let me get your final thoughts on this city of San Bernardino's races, particularly the city attorney's race and that council and that clerk race.
Well, I think with the upset of Tobin Brinker, who's been allied with the mayor, that the mayor has some real concerns about losing his 4-vote majority out of the 7-member council. Now the majority is going to go the other way, and the mayor will have some trouble probably getting through some of his initiatives, and there may be a lot more turmoil and name-calling and unpleasantness on the council, which the council is already known for.
Do you suspect that the mayor will maybe have to change and how he approaches some of his initiatives?
Well, certainly he'll have an uphill battle. I think even just the unpleasantness and the exchanges. One of the events I went to last night, there were 2 Highland council members there who said, "Gee, we're sure glad that our council doesn't behave like this because it would make it real difficult."
Well, Brian and Cassie, I appreciate you joining us. Just to recap those San Bernardino races, City Attorney Jim Penman appears headed for another term. There was an incumbent, Tobin Brinker, who lost his reelection bid against John Valdivia. And a city clerk's race that will head to a February 7th runoff. So that is kind of a recap of yesterday's election. A lot of important school board and municipal races up on yesterday's ballot. Thanks for tuning in, and of course you can head to the pe.com or pick up a copy of the Press Enterprise for the latest election results, and of course we'll be following these races as the new members and incumbents take over on new terms. So again, I'm Dwayne Gang, a politics reporter for the Press Enterprise, and thanks for watching.